Blood debts aren't paid with money. They are paid in flesh. When my father's bankruptcy forced me onto an underground auction block, I was purchased by the most ruthless alpha in Chicago. I expected a living hell. I never expected him to drop to his knees and treat me like a god. Fear has a scent. In an Omega, it smells like burnt sugar, and rotting petals, a sickly sweet distress signal that only makes predatory alphas salivate more. I sat in the suffocating darkness of a steel-reinforced holding cell, my wrists bound with silk ties that mocked the reality of my situation. My name is Oliver Stanton. Less than 48 hours ago, I was a graduate student, quietly hiding my Omega status with black market suppressants, trying to live a normal life in the heart of Chicago. Now I was inventory. My father, Richard Stanton, was a man whose ambition vastly outweighed his competence. He had leveraged our family's logistics company into the ground, borrowing heavily from the kind of men who didn't send collection agencies when you defaulted. They sent extraction teams. When the debt reached $20 million, my father made a choice. He signed a contract, transferring his only viable asset to the syndicate. Me. Through the thin drywall of the holding area, I could hear the muted roar of the auction floor. The underground market, hidden beneath a defunct meatpacking plant in the Fulton Market District, was a playground for the city's depraved elite. "Stand up, Stanton!" a gruff voice barked. The heavy iron door swung open, revealing a beta guard with a cattle prod resting casually against his thigh. Showtime. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to stand. I refused to give them the satisfaction of dragging me. As I was led down a dimly lit concrete corridor, the air grew thick with a dizzying cocktail of dominant pheromones, pine musk, old blood, and expensive cigars. The sensory overload made my Omega instincts scream at me to submit to curl into a ball and bare my neck, but I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper, using the pain to stay grounded. They pushed me through heavy velvet curtains, and the blinding glare of a spotlight hit me instantly. The auction room was designed to look like a 19th century theatre, all plush red seating and gilded balconies. Dozens of men and women, their faces obscured by ornate Venetian masks, sat in the shadows. The auctioneer, a slick alpha with a voice like oiled gravel, grabbed my shoulder and jerked me forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, our final lot of the evening," the auctioneer announced the microphone, amplifying his booming voice. "A pristine, unregistered Omega. 23 years old, unmarked, unclaimed. The bloodline is impeccable. Bidding begins at 5 million. The numbers started flying immediately. Paddles went up in the dark. 6, 7.5, 10. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. $10 million. I was being traded like a piece of rare artwork. I scanned the darkness, terrified of who might be buying me. Would it be a cartel boss, a corrupt politician? I braced myself for a lifetime of suffering, knowing that Omegas sold in these rooms rarely lived past their 30th birthdays. 15 million, a voice slurred from the front row. It was a notoriously sadistic alpha, known only as the Butcher, a man who ran the underground fighting rings. I felt my stomach heave. 15 million going once. The auctioneer drawled, his eyes gleaming with greed. Suddenly the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the theatre blew open with a deafening crash. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. A silence so absolute, so suffocating, fell over the crowd that I could hear the hum of the spotlight above me. It wasn't just fear that silenced them. It was the sheer, crushing weight of a dominant aura. The scent of winter frost, dark cedar, and absolute violence rolled down the aisles. A man stepped into the light. He didn't wear a mask. He didn't need one. Everyone in Chicago knew Dominic Mercer. He was the apex predator of the city's underworld, a billionaire alpha who controlled the docks, the unions, and the politicians with an iron fist. Rumors about him were the stuff of nightmares. They said he had ripped the throat out of a rival cartel leader with his bare hands. They said he kept his enemies in shipping containers at the bottom of Lake Michigan. He was cold, merciless, and completely devoid of empathy. Dominic's tailored charcoal suit clung to a heavily muscled frame, but it was his eyes that paralyzed me. They were a piercing, icy grey, and the moment they locked onto me, the breath was knocked from my lungs. 30 million, Dominic said. His voice wasn't loud, but it resonated through the cavernous room like thunder. The auctioneer visibly trembled. Mr. Mercer, we have a protocol. 30 million. Dominic repeated, taking a slow, deliberate step down the aisle. The masked elite shrank back into their velvet chairs, desperately trying to avoid his gaze. And if anyone in this room speaks another number, I will personally ensure their entire bloodline ends tonight. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The butcher in the front row lowered his paddle so fast he nearly dropped it. Sold, the auctioneer squeaked, slamming his gavel down. To Mr. Mercer. My knees finally buckled. The most dangerous man in the city had just bought my life, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to die. The drive to the Mercer estate was a masterclass in psychological torture. I sat pinned against the plush leather door of a bulletproof Maybach, my knees pulled to my chest, trembling violently. Dominic sat on the opposite side of the spacious cabin, staring out the tinted window into the sprawling city lights. He hadn't spoken a single word to me since his men escorted me into the car. He hadn't touched me. He hadn't even looked at me. His pheromones, however, were doing the talking. The biting scent of winter frost and cedar had completely engulfed the vehicle, neutralizing my panicked, burnt sugar scent. It wasn't an aggressive suppression. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of absolute control. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable. Alphas who spent $30 million on an Omega expected immediate returns. I waited for a rough hand to grab my hair for demands to be barked for the violence that his reputation promised. But the ride remained dead silent until the heavy iron gates of his Lake Forest estate parted for us. The house was less a home and more a fortress, a sprawling modern Gothic mansion perched on a cliff overlooking the dark waters of Lake Michigan. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their faces hidden by tactical gear. The car stopped. A guard opened my door, but before I could move, Dominic was suddenly there. He didn't grab my arm or bark an order. He simply held out a large, heavily scarred hand. I stared at it, terrified. Was this a test? If I refused, would he break my wrist? Slowly shaking like a leaf, I placed my hand in his. His skin was scorching hot, calloused and rough. He didn't squeeze. He merely guided me out of the car with a touch so light it felt entirely out of place for a man of his size and reputation. He led me through grand foyers filled with priceless art and up a sweeping mahogany staircase. The staff we passed kept their eyes glued to the floor, terrified of even glancing in our direction. Finally, he pushed open a set of heavy double doors. "This is your space," Dominic said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent a shiver down my spine. I stepped inside and froze. I had expected a dungeon, a barren room with a lock on the outside. Instead, I was standing in a massive, sun-drenched suite, or it would be during the day. The walls were painted in soft, calming tones of sage and cream. There was a king-sized bed, draped in Egyptian cotton, a massive stone fireplace, and French doors leading out to a private balcony. But what made the breath catch in my throat were the details. On the massive oak desk in the corner sat a stack of advanced astrophysics textbooks, the exact subjects I had been studying in graduate school before my father ruined my life. In the corner, a vintage vinyl record player sat next to a meticulously curated collection of 1970s jazz, my favorite genre. How did he know I backed up until my shoulders hit the doorframe? "What is this?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "What game are you playing?" Dominic stepped into the room and closed the doors behind him with a soft click. The sound echoed like a gunshot in my ears. We were alone. "No games, Oliver," he said quietly. "Don't lie to me." I snapped, hysteria finally bubbling over. The fear was making me reckless. "You paid $30 million for me. You're Dominic Mercer. I know what you do to people. Just get it over with. Do whatever you brought me here to do." I squeezed my eyes shut, turning my head and baring my scent gland in a desperate instinctual display of omega submission, bracing for the bite, for the pain. Seconds ticked by. Nothing happened. I slowly opened my eyes. Dominic hadn't lunged at me. Instead, the towering, terrifying Alpha, a man who commanded a criminal empire and made politicians weep, was slowly lowering himself to the floor. My jaw parted in shock as Dominic Mercer dropped to one knee. He bowed his head, his broad shoulders tense as if he were approaching something sacred. "I did not bring you here to hurt you," Dominic said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't place. It sounded like reverence. "I brought you here to keep you safe from the monsters who are going to tear you apart tonight." I stared at him, my mind short-circuiting. You bought me." "I freed you," he corrected, looking up at me. The icy grey of his eyes had melted into something burning and intense. "This room, this house, this estate, it is all yours. You are not a prisoner here, Oliver. You will never be touched against your will. You will never be harmed. My men answer to you now. I answer to you." "Why?" The word barely left my lips. "I don't even know you." Dominic let out a slow, jagged breath. Slowly he reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a worn, folded piece of paper. He set it gently on the floor between us. "Because 10 years ago, you were the only person in this god-forsaken city who looked at a bleeding, half-dead street rat and saw a human being," Dominic said softly. My eyes darted to the paper. It was a drawing, a childish sketch of a lion drawn on the back of a receipt from a local diner. Memory hit me like a freight train. I was 13. It was pouring rain. A teenage boy had been thrown out of a moving car near my father's warehouse, beaten so badly his face was unrecognizable. While my father's guards had told me to ignore the garbage, I had snuck out, brought the boy a first aid kit, my umbrella, and that stupid drawing to try and make him smile before I was dragged away. "You," I breathed out. "I owe you my life," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a whisper of absolute devotion. "And I have spent every day of the last decade building an empire strong enough to ensure I could protect yours." He stood up, towering over me once more, yet keeping a respectful distance. "Rest, Oliver. Tomorrow we will discuss your father. Because the debt he owed the syndicate wasn't a mistake. He didn't lose that money." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Dominic's expression hardened, the ruthless monster briefly flashing beneath the surface. "Your father didn't go bankrupt, Oliver. He orchestrated the debt. He sold you on purpose to a very specific buyer. I just intercepted the delivery." Before I could demand an answer, Dominic bowed his head once more, stepping backward out of the room. "Sleep safely, my god. The monsters can't reach you here." The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in a golden cage, entirely untouched, yet entirely trapped by a man whose obsession was far more terrifying than his cruelty. Morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains of the Mercer estate, painting the walls of my golden cage in warm, deceptive hues. I hadn't slept. I had spent the entire night huddled in the center of the massive bed, my mind frantically trying to process the violent collision of my past and present. The terrifying crime lord of Chicago wasn't my captor. He was the boy from the rain. A soft knock broke the silence at exactly 8 o'clock. The heavy mahogany door swung open to reveal Dominic. He had discarded his suit jacket, wearing only a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing the intricate dark ink of syndicate tattoos winding up his forearms. He carried a silver tray laden with fresh fruit pastries and black coffee, exactly how I took it. He didn't step fully into the room until I gave a tiny, hesitant nod. Only then did he cross the threshold, setting the tray on a small glass table near the balcony. He kept his eyes lowered, his powerful frame radiating a deliberate, soothing scent of winter frost, designed to keep my frantic Omega instincts calm. "You didn't sleep," Dominic stated softly, stepping back to give me space. "It's hard to sleep when you find out your entire life is a lie," I replied, my voice raspy. I pulled the heavy duvet tightly around my shoulders. "You said my father orchestrated this. You said he sold me on purpose. Prove it." Dominic's jaw tightened. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a sleek black leather folder. He placed it on the desk next to my astrophysics textbooks. "I bought the auction house's internal ledger 2 hours after I brought you here." Dominic explained, his tone shifting into the cold, analytical cadence of a syndicate boss. "The man bidding against me, the one who stopped at 15 million, was a proxy. He was hired by Arthur Langdon." I froze. Arthur Langdon was a prominent pharmaceutical magnate in the city. He was also a man in his late 60s, notorious for his ruthless business practices and a string of mysteriously deceased Omega spouses. "Why would Arthur Langdon want me?" I asked, a wave of nausea washing over me. "Because of your mother," Dominic replied gently. "I had my lead investigator Gregory Pierce dig into your family's financial history. Your mother didn't just leave you her vintage record collection, Oliver. She came from old money European logistics wealth. Before she died, she established an irrevocable blind trust in your name." Dominic stepped closer, tapping the black folder. "Inside this file is the undeniable truth of your father's betrayal. I want you to look at it when you are ready, but you need to know what it contains." The trust stipulation. The trust, valued at roughly $85 million, is legally locked. It only disperses when you turn 30 or upon the legal registration of a mating bond with an alpha. The offshore transfers. Richard Stanton received 4 separate wire transfers of $2 million each from shell companies tied directly to Langdon Pharmaceuticals over the past 6 months. The contract. We intercepted a signed agreement between your father and Arthur Langdon. Langdon agreed to purchase you through the underground auction to avoid legal scrutiny. Once Langdon forcibly mated you, triggering the trust fund release, he agreed to kick back 50% of the $85 million to your father to cover his debts. The air in the room vanished. The burnt sugar scent of my distress flared wildly. My own father hadn't just gambled away his fortune and lost me as collateral. He had methodically planned my assault. He had sold me to a monster to unlock a vault. My knees gave out. I collapsed onto the floor, a broken sob tearing its way out of my throat. In a fraction of a second, Dominic was there. But true to his vow, he didn't grab me. He dropped to his knees about 2 feet away, his massive hands hovering in the air, desperate to comfort me, but terrified of violating my boundaries. A low, rumbling growl of pure distress vibrated in his chest, a primal alpha sound of mourning for his Omega's pain. "Oliver," Dominic pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please, breathe." "He hated me," I sobbed, clutching my chest as panic set in. "My whole life. I was just a walking bank account to him. He was going to let Langdon destroy me." "He is a dead man." Dominic snarled, the temperature in the room plummeting as his pheromones spiked with lethal intent. "I will mount Richard Stanton's head on the gates of this estate. I will burn Langdon Pharmaceuticals to the ground. I will drown them in their own blood for making you cry." I looked up through my tears. Dominic's eyes were pitch black, his pupils dilated with feral, unhinged rage. This was the butcher of Chicago. This was the apex predator. And he was entirely, utterly subservient to my pain. Slowly testing the boundaries of this surreal reality, I reached out. My trembling, pale fingers brushed against the hard muscle of Dominic's forearm. Dominic gasped a sharp intake of breath as if he had been burned. He froze, completely staring at where my skin touched his. "Don't," I whispered, sniffing back my tears. "Don't kill him, not yet. Dying is too easy for a man who cares only about money." Dominic's pitch-black eyes locked onto mine. "Command me," he whispered, his voice dripping with absolute reverence. "Tell me how you want them broken, and I will lay their ruins at your feet." The retaliation didn't happen on my timeline. It happened on Arthur Langdon's. 3 days later, the tranquility of the Mercer estate was shattered by the shrill scream of the perimeter breach alarms. I was in the library reading by the fire when the heavy oak doors burst open. Dominic stormed in his suit jacket, gone an automatic weapon strapped to his chest. His eyes were cold, calculating, and deadly. "Langdon is desperate," Dominic said, his voice a low bark over the sound of distant gunfire. "He found out I intercepted the auction. He knows I have the trust fund documents. He brought a private military contractor to breach the gates." Panic flared in my chest. "Dominic, you are safe here." Dominic interrupted, stepping forward and cupping my face with surprising gentleness, his calloused thumbs brushing my cheekbones. It was the first time he had initiated touch, and the sheer protective warmth of it sent a jolt of electricity down my spine. "The safe room is behind the bookcase. Gregory is waiting inside. I will return for you when the garbage is cleared." Before I could protest, he shoved me behind the reinforced steel door of the panic room. For 45 agonizing minutes, I sat in the dim light of the bunker, listening to the muffled, concussive sounds of a war being waged above me. My heart hammered in my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scared for myself. I was terrified for the ruthless syndicate boss who was currently tearing men apart to protect me. Finally, the gunfire ceased. The heavy steel door clicked and hissed open. Dominic stood in the doorway. He was a terrifying sight. His white shirt was soaked in blood, none of it his. His knuckles were bruised and split, and a thin cut trailed down his cheek. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving his pheromones, a chaotic, suffocating blizzard of violence and adrenaline. He was lost in the alpha haze, a feral state of defensive aggression. Behind him, in the ruined grand foyer, I could see 2 men forced to their knees, surrounded by Mercer's heavily armed guards. It was Arthur Langdon and my father. I stepped out of the panic room. As I approached the foyer, my father looked up. His face was bruised, his expensive suit torn. "Oliver," he shrieked, his voice reeking of desperate manipulation. "Thank God, tell this maniac to let us go. I'm your father." Langdon remained silent, his arrogant eyes darting around the room, calculating a way out that didn't exist. Dominic let out a deafening, chest-rattling roar. He lunged forward, grabbing my father by the throat and hoisting the older man completely off the ground. My father gagged his legs, kicking wildly in the air as Dominic's grip tightened like a vice. "Dominic, stop!" I yelled. Dominic didn't hear me. The feral haze was too thick. He was going to snap my father's neck right in front of me. I didn't think. I ran forward, pushing past the armed guards, and threw my arms around Dominic from behind. I pressed my cheek against his broad, heaving back, and deliberately released my pheromones, not the burnt sugar scent of distress, but a warm, rich scent of honey and amber. It was an Omega's ultimate biological surrender, a grounding anchor for a lost alpha. "Dominic," I whispered, pressing my face into his spine. "I am safe. You kept me safe. Put him down." The effect was instantaneous. Dominic's massive frame shuddered violently. The suffocating blizzard of his scent melted into a protective warm cedar. He dropped my father, who collapsed onto the marble floor, gasping and coughing for air. Dominic turned around slowly. The feral darkness in his eyes cleared, replaced by a devastating vulnerability. He looked at my hands resting on his chest, then up at my face. Without a word, he dropped to his knees, right there in the blood-stained foyer, surrounded by his men, and pressed his forehead against my stomach, breathing in my scent like a dying man finding oxygen. "They tried to take you," Dominic rasped, his voice trembling. "They tried to take my God." "They failed," I said, softly running my fingers through his dark hair. I looked over Dominic's shoulder at the two pathetic men on the floor. "Richard Stanton." I said, my voice eerily calm. The sound of my father's name tasted like ash in my mouth. "You sold me for 50% of my mother's trust. But you forgot one crucial detail about syndicate law." Gregory Pierce stepped forward from the shadows, a sleek tablet in his hand. "Under the Underworld Accords." I continued echoing the laws Dominic had taught me over the past 3 days. A debt is inherited. You owed the syndicate $20 million. By attempting an unsanctioned sale of an asset me to an outside party, you defaulted on your grace period. Your debt is now payable in full immediately. To the man who holds the contract. I looked down at Dominic, who was watching me with absolute spellbound awe. "Take everything they have," I commanded, my voice ringing clearly through the ruined hall. "Liquidate Langdon Pharmaceuticals. Seize my father's remaining assets. Strip them of their names, their wealth, and their dignity. Leave them on the streets, with nothing but the clothes on their backs." Dominic smiled a dark, terrifying expression that sent shivers down my father's spine. "With pleasure," the alpha purred. As the guards dragged the screaming, sobbing men out of the estate, I knelt on the marble floor, bringing myself eye level with the most dangerous man in Chicago. My golden cage wasn't a prison anymore. It was a throne, and Dominic had built it entirely for me. "You called me your God," I whispered, tracing the cut on his cheek. "But gods require devotion." Dominic leaned into my touch, his icy grey eyes burning with a lifetime of pent-up love and violent obsession. "I have worshipped at your altar for 10 years, Oliver. I will worship you until my lungs give out." And as the city of Chicago burned his enemies to ash, I pulled the monster in close and finally let him claim his reward. Did this Omegaverse story leave you breathless? If you loved the intense drama, the jaw-dropping twists, and Dominic's unwavering devotion to Oliver, please tap that like button. It helps the channel bring you more high-stakes, passionate stories. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow BL and Omegaverse fans, and hit that subscribe bell so you never miss a thrilling new release. What was your favorite moment? Let us know in the comments below.